Welcome to the Autism in Black podcast, where we focus on all things autism and the Black parent experience. Our goal is to always educate, support, and empower parents to advocate for not only their children, but themselves. Hello, and welcome to the Autism in Black podcast. I'm Maria Davis-Pierre, a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Florida and America's #1 autism advocate for Black parents. I am the founder and CEO of Autism in Black, Inc., where we aim to include the excluded. Today, we have Jeannette Washington, who has worked as a speech pathologist, software engineer, and educator. She empowers those with speech and language disorders to pursue employment in tech. Her work is documented in her book, Technical Difficulties: Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. Currently, Jeannette works with Microsoft Corporation to close the tech skills opportunity gap. I'm really excited about this episode as me and Jeannette had a great conversation about the current racial climate in today's society, as well as pursuing a career in tech. Enjoy today's episode. Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Autism in Black podcast. I am very excited for today's guest because she is a wealth of knowledge, and we're going to be getting down into some really interesting things. So today we have Jeannette Washington. Hi, Jeannette.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I cannot complain. Who would want to hear it though if I could, you know?
True. You're right about that. So I have read your very impressive bio, and I want you to start us off with telling us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, awesome. I'd be happy to. So I am a native Detroiter, born and raised here, and I'm a product of the local school district. It was a public school. I started my aspirations wanting to be an editor for like Vogue. I saw myself as that Devil Wears Prada, Miranda Priestley. And that's what I saw. And I was like, this is the life I want. So when I went to college, I took up mass communications, started working as a radio personality. And I didn't love it. I didn't hate it, but I didn't really love it while I was in college. But I felt that my voice could still be used, but it could be used to maybe amplify voices that were muffled, stifled, or misunderstood. So that is how I began my journey working towards my degrees in speech pathology, and eventually working within a school system. And then it kind of, evolved after that.
Wow. So from your bio, we see that your career experience includes being a speech pathologist, software engineer, and an educator. How do you use all of that in the work that you do?
Great question. So working as a speech pathologist, I gained valuable insight on the inner workings of the education system and the inequalities that laid hidden within, educational policy. So I did that for quite some time. I wanted a change of pace. I saw that the tech industry was booming, and I was like, I definitely want to be a part of that. So I learned how to write computer code and build apps in about 2017. I submitted for a lot of different tech conferences just to kind of put myself out there. I did some international and some domestic conferences, but what I found is that people were so intrigued by my background being a speech pathologist. They were like, hey, so how can we make our websites more accessible for people who have speech and language disorders, who may be deaf or have a low vision? So then that helped me kind of pivot a little more towards technology as I started working with companies to help them create websites, applications that were accessible, that were very diverse, and of most were filled with equity. So people that looked like me, people that didn't look like me, people who didn't learn like me could still take advantage of that. I've spoken at about 32 conferences within the last year and a half, give or take. Wow. And recently my work contains, or it involves rather, me helping to close the opportunity gap. I work with Microsoft, and we are creating and empowering sustainable computer science programs in high schools so that the tech industry can be filled with people who think differently, look differently, and it won't be a one size fits all in tech.
I love that. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how it works with going into the high schools?
So yeah, it's pretty interesting. My caseload, as I call it, and I'm using that word based off of my background in speech
Yes.
pathology. But I have about 17 high schools I work with here in the Metro Detroit area, and I provide the high school teachers with the curriculum to use. I also go out and locate volunteers that can come in and assist and support essentially the high school teacher as she or he introduces students to computer science. They have computer science principle courses that they take, and they go all the way up to AP computer science courses. So it's a program through Microsoft called TEALS. It's really a phenomenal program. And we are doing some summer trainings and getting our teachers equipped and prepared, and also volunteers. We're teaching them about what it's like to work in the classroom, because a lot of our volunteers are tech professionals. So they work at Google, or they work at Facebook, or all of these Silicon Valley tech companies, and some of the local tech companies as well. And they come into the high schools and help teach all kids, all high schoolers rather, how to code.
Wow. And I know that you empower those who have a speech and language disorder to pursue careers in tech. Can you tell us why that is so important?
Well, my essential love was always for those who had voices that I felt were being muffled or stifled. So with my work, I like to make sure that those individuals with dyslexia, or those individuals with Asperger's, or that are on that autism spectrum, that they're being represented and that they're getting the resources necessary so that they can live a fulfilled life, as well as having a fulfilling career. So those things are important to me. They always have been important to me. So I try to make it my business when I go out and do my work, that those individuals are at the forefront. They're at that table, they're a part of the conversation, and that they are seen and heard.
Yeah, because as we know, it is extremely difficult for a lot of those who are disabled or have neurological differences to get employed and stay employed a lot of
Yes.
the time, because employers may not understand how to work with those who are disabled and have neurological differences.
Agreed.
So I love that you have this movement towards that, because it's so important. And it's often something that a lot of parents worry about, is their child being independent and having gainful employment. So with that, I know, especially for Black parents, one added layer to, having a child with a disability is the race factor. So when we're talking about the intersection of race and disability and adding those factors in when pursuing a career, can you touch on that just a little bit?
Sure. So employers can't discriminate based on ability or race, but we still see so little representation, not only in tech, but in other industries that exist. So we are fundamentally looking at the other American dream, which is race and opportunity. Racial groups, there are major gaps within these racial groups. I think about education, employment, wealth, and they reflect obviously a disproportionate representation of Black families, because they're consistently at the bottom of the income scale. I know to me, the urgent question is always, why is income distribution so skewed by race or ability?
Yes.
Black children are more likely to be born into poverty than white children, but they are also less likely to escape poverty.
Mm.
And I also think about the fact that more than half of Black adults raised at the bottom of the income scale, they remain stuck there as adults compared to a third of whites. So there are some disparities that needs to be addressed. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I'm hoping that the work I'm doing and the work that we're seeing being done all over will definitely address those gaps as it relates to race, disability, and that intersection of those two.
Yes. And what advice would you have for actual employers, the big tech companies who are not, being inclusive of those who are, one, have a disability, and two, are Black?
So that's a great question. I know it's definitely been one that a lot of employers are pondering lately. I feel like my LinkedIn is going crazy right now with so many conversations happening around this particular topic. I think that the second pandemic, which was like the racial component of what we're going through now, had to happen so that people can see, they could see the bigger picture, or they can see the daylight. Because I think a lot of employers are going along with their heads down, and they're not really looking at the numbers, the statistics, and looking at the reality of what's happening. So my advice to those who are seeking employment, possibly, or know individuals who are seeking employment and they meet at that intersection of race, I would say to continue to put your best foot forward and continue to apply for different positions as they come available to employers. I would say that your company, your product will not be innovative if you don't have people who think and look differently from you, that's helping drive those decisions, and that it's helping drive that ingenuity and that flexibility. As we've seen, now that the pandemic has occurred, everybody is online, and nobody thought that we'd all be like Zooming and using Webinar Jam or Neuro and all of these different video conferencing devices. We had to pivot. We had to learn how to position ourselves in such a way. So I think that employers would benefit if they learned how to pivot and really embrace those that are different.
I love that word, pivot, because I think it's so important, because usually, when a difference is noticed or when, they see that we're Black, the conversation shifts, and it makes it so much more difficult, for us to navigate these things. Like you said, it's harder for us to navigate all of those, dips and valleys that keep us from being successful.
I agree.
Yes. So moving on, I know that something that you also talk about is the adultification bias and how it impacts disabled individuals. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So recently I was doing some Googling, and I don't know exactly how I got or came across adultification bias, but it definitely, triggered my intrigue, and I started reading a little bit more about it. And after reading the research done by Georgetown, I couldn't agree more with the statistics that they've quoted or the information that they found in their studies. So adultification bias and how it impacts disabled individuals, it basically is about how adults view Black children as more adult-like and less innocent than their white peers. So adultification is linked to harsher treatment and higher standards for Black children. It reminds me of being in the classroom and working with African American children opposed to working with maybe European American children. I would see that their punishments would be different based on the same thing that they've potentially done. And it always kind of baffled me. But there are also negative stereotypes of Black women and children as being angry, aggressive, or hypersexualized. opposed to their white counterparts. So adults attempt to change Black girls' behavior to be more passive, and Black boys as well. And adultification bias can lead educators and other authorities to treat Black women and children in a developmentally inappropriate ways. So that's, again, something that truly intrigued me because I've seen it and I did not know what I was seeing at the time. I just knew it wasn't right. I didn't feel right about, this European American child with this disability getting a lesser punishment or just getting a talking to, and then this Black boy or girl that had a similar infraction being like kicked out of the school or AT'd for the whole school year. And you're like, wait, and I couldn't put it together. But after reading this study, again, it was done by Georgetown, it started to kind of put some things in place for me. And it even reminds me of our current justice system, how we'll see, and these are adults, so this is a little different. It wouldn't be considered adultification, but just how Blacks are treated less innocent than whites, and it's harsher treatments. The standards are different. We're always viewed as more aggressive. It's funny because one of my colleagues, she's European American, and she posted on Instagram, and it was like a boat with some kids in it. And all of the kids seemed happy, and the Black kid was upset. And I kind of questioned that because I think we're at a time where we need to have those conversations. So I said, well, all the kids in this little boat look pretty joyful. Why does the African American young man look upset? And then she stated that the graphics she purchased, that's how they had the little boy. So I told her I felt that it was inappropriate. And I think it definitely sent off the wrong messages to me. I'm not sure what it sent out to my white counterparts, but I think she really took that valuable suggestion to heart, and she took it down. And she was like, wow, I didn't think about it like that. But it's so ingrained in our culture, we don't think about it like that. You just automatically assume, if you walk into a police station, you see a Black little boy or girl, and then you see a white little boy or girl, you automatically assume, what did you do? What did you do?
And it's even down to the language that is used with our children in the school system.
Agreed.
Aggressive, putting all these terms to make it a more behavioral issue. Having standards that are unrealistic for our children as they're Black, and you have these unrealistic expectations they're supposed to meet because of your own biases, and the kids don't meet them. So in your eyes, they're always failing. But the fact is, you as an educator have these biases that you're not even really conscious of against these group of Black children. And that's why this is happening. And it sets our children up for school to prison pipeline.
It does. That is true. And it shows adults have less empathy for Black children, all in all. It's like, little Peter over here. Oh, Peter, I hate that you did that. But you see little Raheem over here, and you're like, oh, you're the worst. You are just, come on. So they're less empathetic overall.
Yeah, and affects what they're going to do as far as employment and things like that, because these biases follow us. So when we're seen as, angry Black women, but the white counterpart is seen as passionate, that affects us in, our careers. Yeah.
She's very assertive.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but we get these terms of, I wish you would be quiet. Why do you have to talk?
So loud. You're so angry.
Yeah.
So it follows us. For sure.
And for our children who have those, disabilities and neurological differences, and they're not able to, quite understand these kind of details when working in these spaces, that impacts them, especially, for our Black children who are going into these career fields. If they're not understanding, how it works in the white spaces in the career field in a lot of these corporations, because they haven't changed thus far yet. We're hoping for that change, that hinders
They
them.
put the little black square up and they said that was it.
Yes.
You know, Black Lives Matter. They did a little statement, and that was the extent of it.
Exactly.
A little bit more. We need a little bit more from our allies and our co-conspirators, for sure.
Yes, because we know for certain that we operate differently. Those of us who have disabilities, we operate differently because of the intersection of race and disability. And if employers aren't aware of this information, it just keeps us from being successful.
Yes. And it reminds me, and again, let me make this statement. I don't know if Elijah McClain was on the spectrum, but just kind of watching the transcript of what he said to the police, it made me think that he possibly was. But it's just, you know, things like that, like these cops, they call it the cop agenda, you know, and our babies that are on the spectrum, whether it's a dyslexia spectrum, a autism spectrum, a ADHD spectrum, they're really suffering as it relates to, you know, employment, education, and then even in the American justice system.
Most definitely, because all of these systems are in place to be against us.
Agreed.
And it just makes it harder. So when people are talking about, oh, you know, equality isn't even good enough, you know, for us, because we still have those dips and valleys we have to deal with. We want justice. Okay, we need you to, you know, get rid of these systems that are in place to keep us from being successful, that keep our babies from being successful in these fields in education. Like I was saying, school to prison pipeline. There's probably so many, and studies have shown Black males who are in prison that, one, have had IEPs, or two, have gone undiagnosed with some form of learning disability or disability in general.
If you look up the statistics on just how many prisoners are illiterate, it's alarming. It's over half for sure. I don't know the specific number, but it just really threw me off. One of my good friends posted about it, and I was just like, whoa. You know, so a lot of these individuals didn't even get proper training, proper education before they got slipped into that pipeline you mentioned. So
yeah. Wow. And that brings me to talking about your book. And I know you have a book called Technical Difficulties: Why Dyslexic Narratives Matter in Tech. And for a lot of, you know, parents listening, their child may also, even though they have autism diagnosis, they also may have a diagnosis of dyslexia, because we know that, you know, diagnosis overlap, especially when it comes to autism. So can you talk about your book and tell us about your book?
I sure can. So I wrote my book, Technical Difficulties, after having gone overseas, and I spent some time working within the education scope in Nigeria. And I had a lot of people that were intrigued by my background of working with individuals with dyslexia and autism and selective mutism. And so I created this book as a love letter to those individuals with dyslexia, or, I mean, from my research in Nigeria, about 98% of those who live there who have dyslexia go undiagnosed. So this book is for, you know, it's a international read, so it doesn't matter where you are. However, I wrote 5 chapters about how those with dyslexia or that exhibit dyslexic traits can find employment, can talk to their employer about accommodations and modifications, how they can use their unique abilities to really stand out in the workforce, especially and specifically the tech workforce. As you know, tech is booming right now. I'm currently in tech as well, and I want to see more people that are not neurodiverse in the workforce. So again, this is my love letter. It's about 5 chapters. It's not a really long read, but it's a great, inspiring piece that will get you moving those pieces and pushing that dial. And ultimately, when people read this, I want them to take away the fact that, if they put their mind to it, they can certainly do whatever they want as it relates to working, entrepreneurship, creating products, or even working for someone. Whatever they put their mind to, they can definitely achieve it.
I love that. And I'm quite sure that those who do have selective mutism, autism, and other diagnoses can use the tips as well to try to navigate the tech field and gain employment.
Agreed. I actually, I've played with the idea of doing one specifically for those with autism. However, it would probably overlap with a lot of the information that I have in this book. So it's a general read. I think that if you have autism, if you have dyslexia, if you have ADHD, as we discussed selective mutism, I think that you will still find some great gems in this read.
Perfect. And I highly recommend it. So go get a copy because it can be helpful for you to help your child, or your child, if you're, an adult or about to emerge into the working field, get this book because it can be helpful to you.
Agreed.
Now, as we're wrapping up, do you have any resources, advice, tips for parents who are listening, or for actual disabled individuals who are listening and trying to, emerge into the tech force?
Sure. So what I would highly suggest is to curate your feeds.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Instagram, curate the content that you're seeing so that it provides you with insight as it relates to what you want to do. Mm-hmm. For instance, on my Instagram, I only generally follow organizations that are giving me insightful viewpoints, that are providing me with tips and techniques and tricks. And I would highly suggest parents and those on the spectrum who are looking for gainful employment to consider just curating your feed so that all of the information you are taking in and you're, enveloping, it is information that is providing you with inspiration. It is providing you with insight and awareness, education, and just helping you to make sure that you always are putting your best foot forward.
I love that. I love that.
Yep.
Now, where can listeners find you? And I highly suggest following her on Instagram because she has the best graphics and they always are full of information. If you follow me, you probably know I share them all the time anyway, but follow her and, be able to see her when she posts these graphics because they're so informative.
Thank you. So that's another part of my curating your feed. I think about when I post, like, what do I want to convey? You can only put so many pictures of yourself and of your traveling excursions before people are like, okay, yeah, this is getting boring. So I really like to provide tips and hints and clues and things that are going to make people stop and think like, wow, I never thought about that. So I put speech and language norms up there so parents and professionals can see where their kids are supposed to be. I've put information up about dyslexia therapists. What do they do? I've put something up about speech and language therapists so people can understand, what does a speech and language pathologist actually do? Like, what does this job entail? So I find myself always creating content that has value because it's going to educate you. And that is my main platform. I do have a Twitter, a Facebook, and I do have a LinkedIn as well. But I think Instagram is probably the most fun for me. I think about my students who have special needs and how they love utilizing graphic organizers and visuals to help them put the pieces together. So I thoroughly enjoy Instagram and putting those pieces together for people.
I love that. And your IG name for those who are listening.
Alrighty, so it is going to be Bearly, and that is like the actual bear, BEARLY _articulating.
And I highly suggest, because she had a post about apps And
Yeah.
I was like, this is a really good post. And I went and got every one of those apps.
I'm gonna save it so I can come back to this.
Yes, I was like, okay, yes. And I was getting all those apps. And I was like, this is information that, one, you know, I'm not in the tech field, as you all know. I'm a therapist. I stay in my lane. But that was helpful for me. And then working with my kids, I'm like, okay, these are apps that, you know, they'll like, and that, you know, it'd be helpful for them. So I'm telling you, the information is so valuable. So please follow her.
Thank you very much. I did do a couple posts about like different apps that parents can use, different AAC devices. So yeah, I try to keep it interesting. I'm going to be posting soon about stuttering and what that looks like on a video conferencing call. So always trying to think of some creative tips to put out there into the world so that people can utilize it and really be able to thrive.
Thank you, Jeanette, for being on the podcast, dropping so many gems about tech and how those who are disabled or have neurological differences can navigate these systems. So thank you for dropping these gems.
Very welcome.
And thank you all for listening, and catch the next episode of the podcast.
Thank you.
If you haven't done so, make sure to subscribe to our podcast so you can always be notified when a new episode drops. To get the resources shared on today's podcast and the show notes, make sure to go to autisminblack.org/podcast. And be sure to share your takeaways from the show on IG stories and Twitter using our official hashtag AIBpod so that we can find them and share them. And if you want to continue the conversation from today's episode, make sure to join our Autism in Black podcast Facebook community. And please make sure to answer the questions to gain entry. Thank you for listening and joining me this week. Have a good one.